The Great Smoky Mountains feel alive, breathing and whispering beneath a fog that never really lifts. Millions of hikers think they've seen everything here. They haven't. There are trails that end without reason, fences that appear overnight, caves sealed with concrete, and towns erased from every map, yet still standing in the woods, windows staring like eyes that never close. Officials blame safety, but the rangers who've been here long enough know better. Because in these mountains, some places remember you, and some things don't echo back. They answer. Lock your doors, put your headphones on. After this, you'll never see the Smoky Mountains the same way again. Elkmont's forgotten suburb. In the early 1900s, Elkmont was the crown jewel of Tennessee's hidden wilderness, a private escape for Knoxville's elite. They built cabins along the Little River, held lantern-lit dances in the Appalachian dark, and called it the Wonderland of the Smokies. But in 1934, when the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was created, everything changed. The government bought the land and gave the residents lifetime leases, contracts that quietly expired in the early 1990s. When the last signatures faded, the park moved in. Cabins were boarded up, roads were blocked, signs were removed, and the forest began to take it back. At first, it seemed like a standard preservation effort. Some cabins were restored for history's sake, others dismantled for safety, but there was one section, deeper in the woods, past a small bridge now swallowed by moss, that was completely fenced off. No explanation, no map reference, no patrols, just silence. Locals called it the quiet side. According to early maintenance records, it included at least 6 standing houses, homes never reclaimed or razed, just sealed. A few workers claimed they'd been instructed to avoid the area after audible disturbances were reported by survey crews in 1992. One ranger, who later transferred out of the park, described hearing a phonograph playing from inside one of the locked cabins, an old waltz echoing through the trees. When he approached, the music stopped. The cabin, he said, was empty. Dust layered the record player inside, its needle broken decades ago. Over the years, hikers have found remnants of paths leading toward the restricted zone. Park maps mark them only as non-maintained access roads, yet people who follow them report the same experience: a sudden drop in temperature, the smell of wet wood, and the distinct feeling of being watched. Some say the air there doesn't move, it waits. By 2016, after a string of trespassing incidents and online explorers leaking photos of the decaying homes, the National Park Service quietly reinforced the barriers. The official reason? Public safety and environmental restoration. But documents obtained through public record requests show an unusual line item: acoustic monitoring equipment, deployed and removed within months. Whatever they were listening for, they found something. Because since that year, no new permits have been granted anywhere near the old Elkmont suburb. Not for research, not for restoration, not even for cleanup. And some nights, hikers still swear they can hear it. Faint music drifting through the pines, fading when you move toward it, but always one step ahead. But that wasn't the last sound they heard. White Oak Sink Cave System. The White Oak Depression looks harmless from above, a shallow wooded sinkhole surrounded by wildflowers and limestone cliffs. Hikers used to pass through there on their way to the Schoolhouse Gap Trail, stopping to rest in the cool air that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. But beneath this calm lies one of the most dangerous and restricted systems in the Great Smoky Mountains. The problem began quietly, with the bats. In the winter of 2009, park rangers noticed hundreds of dead bats scattered around the entrance to one of the caves. The cause was attributed to white nose syndrome, a fungus that has decimated bat populations throughout the eastern United States. To protect the survivors, park officials closed off the area. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Between 2013 and 2015, 3 separate incidents occurred within the cave system, despite the ban. The first involved a spelunker who entered alone and never returned. His rope was later found. It had been cleanly cut as if it had melted. The second was a pair of biology students who reported hearing what they described as a mechanical humming coming from deeper tunnels before retreating. And the third, a team of park rangers investigating the previous disappearances, reported a collapse that blocked their exit for nearly 6 hours. When they emerged, their audio recordings captured something disturbing, a low, pulsing hum that oscillated in patterns, almost like breathing. The area was immediately sealed off, filled with concrete and closed to the public, but the humming did not stop. In the years that followed, hikers continued to report strange phenomena near the restricted site. Phones lose signal. Compasses spin. Some claim to hear rhythmic vibrations in the ground, stronger just before storms hit the mountain ridge. One hiker described the phenomenon as the earth trying to speak through its own stones. Freedom of information requests made by local journalists revealed that the park installed acoustic sensors in the sinkhole between 2016 and 2018, the same type used in geological monitoring. Strangely, these sensors were removed just 6 weeks later, and all the project data was classified as non-public environmental record. A retired park ranger, interviewed anonymously, said that during his last patrol near the site, his radio began to pick up interference, not static, but what sounded like overlapping voices in reverse order. "We thought it was signal reflection," he said, until one of the voices said my name. Today, access is strictly controlled by Duro. It is completely forbidden. The fences are high, the signs warn of structural instability, and no official map shows the true depth of the caves. Even so, local residents still talk about the nights when the hum returns, a sound too deep to be heard, but heavy enough to be felt in your ribs. And what if the earth itself could breathe? What else could be buried beneath the Great Smoky Mountains, still alive? Hazel Creek townsite. When the ground hums in the Smokies, the echoes travel farther than most imagine. Some say they follow the water, sliding beneath the soil, carried by the rivers that feed Fontana Lake. That's where Hazel Creek sleeps now, a drowned town erased from the maps but not from memory. In the early 1900s, Hazel Creek was a thriving logging community. There were schools, a post office, even a small church whose bell tower stood high above the valley. But when the Tennessee Valley Authority built Fontana Dam in 1944, everything below a certain elevation had to go. Families were relocated, coffins were moved, at least most of them. The valley flooded, and beneath the new lake, Hazel Creek disappeared. For decades, the only way to reach it was by boat. Fishermen would drift over the water where the old roads once ran, watching their sonar screens flicker with shapes, walls, steeples, stairways that led to nowhere. Locals swore they could still hear the church bell on foggy mornings, muffled and distant, as if wrung from beneath the surface. In 1972, divers from Western Carolina University conducted a brief expedition documenting the submerged remains. Their report was brief, too brief. The final page mentions unusual preservation of wooden structures and a recommendation against further dives due to psychological strain. One diver never returned to the program, telling colleagues he heard something moving inside the schoolhouse. Over time, a new generation of rangers and boaters began to notice changes. The lake's currents shifted unpredictably, pulling towards certain inlets near the old town site. The sound of water there seemed irregular, like it wasn't reflecting off rock, but something hollow. In 2010, a severe drought dropped Fontana's water levels to record lows, exposing parts of Hazel Creek for the first time in 60 years. Visitors found the tops of chimneys jutting from the mud, and the tip of the church's bell tower. According to one witness, a local historian named Ralph Gibson, the metal appeared polished, untouched by rust. He returned days later with a small team to photograph the site. By then, the tower was gone, submerged again even though the water had not risen. The next morning, park officials declared the area restricted, citing safety concerns and unstable terrain. But satellite imagery from that same week shows a cluster of boats and unmarked equipment stationed near the site. Activity never explained or repeated. Today, no one is allowed within several hundred yards of Hazel Creek's heart, yet campers along the shore still talk about hearing bells on windless nights, ringing from deep below the surface, growing fainter the closer you listen. And if sound can travel through water, what might it awaken in stone? The caves of Gregory Ridge. Not far from where Hazel Creek lies submerged, another part of the Great Smoky Mountains hides something that was never meant to be found. In the spring of 1972, a geology student named Robert Greer came across a narrow fissure near the Gregory Ridge Trail, a section of limestone that seemed to have been split cleanly, like glass under a blade. He followed it into the darkness. Expecting to find only a small patch of rock, what he discovered was a complete system of chambers. The first reports described smooth corridors, unnaturally shaped, that wound deep into the mountain ridge. Some walls appeared melted, not eroded. Others showed marks of circular heat patterns, as if something had pressed against the rock from within. Greed and his team mapped less than 400 meters before their lamps began to flicker. A low vibration filled the air, like the distant hum of machines, even though there was no electricity for miles around. They left their equipment behind and sealed the entrance with wooden supports, intending to return. 2 weeks later, the entrance collapsed on its own. At the end of 1973, the National Park Service quietly fenced off the site. The official reason was geological instability, but field notes archived at the University of Tennessee reveal a more chilling phrase scribbled in the margin: thermal residue, consistent with unnatural origin. Over the following decade, sporadic attempts to reopen the ridge failed. The drills would overheat. Rock samples would vitrify under the drill as if reacting to the touch. A local foreman described the situation bluntly: the stone sweated heat. When the crew returned days later, they found that the rock had hardened again. Now fused into a single unbroken wall, locals began to call it the sealed vein. Some believed it was the result of lightning trapped underground. Others whispered about war tests, that the government had buried something there during the atomic age. But no record from Oak Ridge, the nearest research facility, ever mentions operations in Cades Cove. In 1994, a small tremor shook the region. The next morning, campers at Abrams Creek reported hearing what sounded like a deep, low rumble coming from underground, followed by a single hollow, cracking sound. The park rangers inspected the mountain ridge and discovered that the metal fence surrounding the old cave site had been bent inward, as if it had been pulled toward the sealed stone. Since then, Gregory Ridge has remained closed. Even drones are prohibited within a 1-mile radius. Some who broke this rule have posted videos online. Nothing visible, just sharp distortion and audio that gradually fades away until it suddenly cuts out. And although the park reports cite thermal anomalies and electromagnetic interference, a park ranger who visited the site during the last inspection described the situation differently. The rock was hot, and if you stood still long enough, you could feel it breathing. But when the mountains start to exhale, fire is never far behind. Chimney Tops Fire Trail. By the time the first flames were seen above the chimney tops, the air quality was already poor. Residents said the feeling was electric, dry, vibrant, and far too calm for that time of year. November in the Great Smoky Mountains usually brings rain, fog, and cold. But in 2016, the forest crackled like something about to explode. The fire started small, officially attributed to 2 teenagers seen throwing matches from the overlook. However, investigators noticed something strange. The ignition points didn't match the direction of the wind. They were scattered, irregular, as if the fire had started right there underneath. Witnesses that night described orbs of pale blue light floating above the treetops hours before the fire spread. At first, they thought it was lightning. Then they realized the lights weren't rising, but descending. Several hikers coming down the Chimney Tops trail swore they saw a light hovering above a ridge, then disappearing into the ground. By dawn, the fire had already spread for miles in every direction, consuming Gatlinburg in one of the worst natural disasters in Tennessee's history. 14 people died, more than 2,000 homes were destroyed, and over 7,000 hectares were reduced to ashes. But what most disturbed investigators was not the extent of the fire, but the way it spread so quickly. Meteorologists described the phenomenon as an impossible firestorm. Winds reached gusts of over 130 kilometers per hour, even though no regional data recorded the presence of a storm front. The fire generated its own weather, with spiraling columns of flames that defied the normal behavior of wildfires. And right at the center of it, directly beneath the chimneys, a deep fissure was discovered. Its edges were charred and smooth, as if something had burned its way out from inside the mountain. Weeks after the containment, forest rangers revisiting the site reported an inexplicable heat still emanating from underground. Thermal imaging showed pockets of residual heat, still active months after the last ember had already died out. The ground around it pulsed in cycles, as if breathing in sync with the earth itself. A confidential report later leaked online under the title Anomalous Thermal Activity, Site 17B. The document described localized energy retention and combustion signatures inconsistent with organic material. It disappeared within a few days, but not before a researcher published a final note. The pattern is not random. The ground burns along geological faults as if it were following instructions. Since then, that stretch of the trail has never been fully reopened. What remains is a narrow overlook surrounded by warning signs, a blackened forest that still gives off a faint smell of smoke, even on cold days. Some nights, hikers claim to have seen faint blue lights hovering near the ridge again, the same shade witnesses saw before the fire started. And if the fire can follow commands, what could still be guiding it? Beneath the hollow ground of the Great Smoky Mountains, the Nolan City Tunnel System. When the Fontana Dam was completed in 1944, it not only flooded towns like Hazel Creek, but also isolated them. The government of Cienciera had promised a new road to reconnect the lost communities. Construction began, but it was never truly finished. The road was called Lakeview Drive, although the locals know it by another name, the Road to Nowhere. It stretches for 6 miles through untouched forest before ending abruptly at a concrete entrance, the Nolan Tunnel. Beyond it, the path disappears into unfinished corridors of granite and mud, abandoned since the mid-20th century. The official reason: budget cuts, unstable rock, and environmental concerns. But according to internal memos from 1943, project engineers reported unclassified disturbances during excavation, strange echoes that didn't match the tunnel's dimensions, and rhythmic vibrations coming from deep within the ridge. Work was halted after a fatal collapse, but the survivors claimed that the collapse started from inside, not from the ceiling. Over the decades, the tunnel became a local curiosity. Teenagers dared each other to cross it. Photographers documented the dripping walls and graffiti with warnings in uneven letters. But every few years, someone would disappear. They weren't lost. They simply vanished. Forest rangers often found the same abandoned object: flashlights with their bulbs melted inward. In 2011, a group of urban explorers sent a drone into the main tunnel, hoping to map its end. The transmission went normally for 2 minutes before becoming distorted. Static, flickering, and then a completely black screen. 72 hours later, the drone's GPS tracker was reactivated. Point inside A restricted area of the park, is 5 kilometers from the tunnel entrance. The footage was unrecoverable, except for 6 seconds of distorted sound that technicians described as metal scraping against stone, like a train arriving without tracks. A year later, when another team repeated the experiment, the drone returned autonomously, landing near the entrance without operator intervention. The internal SD card was corroded, but park staff confirmed that the camera lens had slightly melted at the edges due to heat exposure. There were no signs of fire. The local residents have their own theories. Some believe that the tunnels broke into a geological cavity connected to old mine shafts. Others claim that the government used them for tests during the war and sealed off what they couldn't control. But the strangest claim came from a former park maintenance worker who retired in 1999. He said that the tunnels were not abandoned, but rather redirected. When asked what he meant, he simply replied, "They no longer lead through the mountain. They lead beneath it." Today, steel gates block all known entrances to the Nolan system. The air near the tunnel entrance is unusually cold, but the walls sweat condensation with a faint smell of ozone. Visitors describe whispers that reverberate irregularly, as if the echo came from someone standing just behind them, out of sight. And sometimes, when the mist rolls in from Lake Fontana, you can hear a long, hollow rumble, like a train approaching that never arrives. Because in the Smoky Mountains, some tunnels don't end in darkness. They began there, 6 places hidden beneath the breath of the Great Smoky Mountains. 6 reasons why maps don't tell the whole truth. Empty cabins in Elkmont, where the music still plays for no one. White Oak Sink, vibrating from the earth itself. Hazel Creek, ringing bells for the drowned. Gregory Ridge, sealed by a fire that never cooled. Chimney Tops, where the sky burned from within. And the Nolan Tunnel, echoing towards something that was never built, but never stopped moving. Maybe it's all connected. The sound, the heat, the silence between them. Maybe the mountains remember what we try to forget. Every fence, every closed area sign, every inexplicable restriction might not be meant to protect us from what's inside. It might be a matter of protection. What's inside? From us. 6 stories. 6 warnings carved in the mist. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. Leave a like if any of these stories resonated with you. Tell us which place haunted you the most and which one we should explore next. But remember, some trails aren't lost, they're waiting.